Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Can You Hear Me? I'm Eileen Rochford, CEO of the marketing and strategy firm, The Harbinger Group.
And I'm Rob Johnson, president of Rob Johnson Communications. Here at the Can You Hear Me podcast, we like to discuss and enlighten you on information that will be useful in your careers and sometimes in your family life. Today's topic is the latter. As the parents of teenagers, we pay attention more than most to the trends and the pitfalls and how they could negatively impact the ones we love.
So, just to be clear, Rob and I want to stress that what we're talking about today, the negative impact of social media on young people, this isn't the opinion of just two parents, although we do hold that opinion for sure. We share it. That's why we're talking about it. But the Surgeon General of the United States recently issued a new advisory about the negative effects social media has on youth mental health. That just came out around May 30th, I believe, 2023. So, in this advisory, it notes that children 13 to 17 admit they use social media almost constantly. That's a direct quote, almost constantly. So, Surgeon General Vivek Murthy is calling for urgent action by policymakers, also the tech companies who made this stuff, researchers, families, and young people to minimize the harms of social media platforms because we need to create safer, healthier online environments in order to protect children. That's the premise of this report.
Yeah, it's very important. Dr. Murthy is quoted in the release saying, children are exposed to harmful content on social media, ranging from violent and sexual content to bullying and harassment. And for too many children, social media is compromising their sleep and valuable in person time. Remember, in person time with their family and friends.
Yeah. And he also added that we are in the middle of a national youth mental health crisis. And he shared his concern that social media is an important driver of that crisis and one that we must urgently address. And I personally really appreciate that a person in his position took this position on the issue. It's kind of like in my head as a parent and just as a consumer of social media, it made me think, gosh, it's about darn time. Like this thing has gone unchecked for far too long. But he's not alone. This report that he created, which I think is like 14 pages long, it's pretty significant. And I encourage everyone to read it. We'll include it in the show notes, of course. He also had about six other leaders of the nation's medical organizations express their concern in this report,
These are
including
big
those
names
from
too. Yeah.
the American Academy of Family Physicians, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, and there's a couple others. So this isn't just the Surgeon General. So let's, in other words, I don't see this as political. I think this is a medical and mental health issue and one that honestly everyone should be paying a lot more attention
Yeah,
to.
I hope people understand this is not political in the least, and this is all about giving parents and young people the best information that we can about how serious it is.
Yeah. So with I think that's enough backdrop, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah.
Rob, to kind of tee this up.
Sure.
So let's turn to our guest, Avery Resendez. Hi, Avery. Avery works at the Harbinger Group. She's been on the podcast before. And as a Gen Zer, I think she's got a unique perspective here.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Avery, you grew up in this world. You can really talk about your opinion looking back now that you're 21. What did you think, in the rear view about the impact social media has had on you and your peers, good and bad? So how serious do you think this issue is, Avery? And just share your general, feelings. I know you've read the report and other information on this important topic. So please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hello, thank you. So, as much as social media is a tool, I do think that this is like a very serious issue. Like you both mentioned, has to do with the physical and mental health of our youth. And kids are very impressionable, especially at the ages of 13 to 17. And being exposed to hate speech, harmful images, and videos is something that's going on regularly. I think about it, and let's be honest. Social media is not as heavily regulated as we really think it is. You can get away with a lot in terms of what you're posting, whether it's speech, those videos, those photos, and it's even super easy. I know that some social media platforms have an age restriction. It's so easy for a child to type in a fake birthday to meet those age requirements, and it's scary. I think there's two really big issues, though, with children and people in general on social media. The first being, I feel like when you're posting or communicating online, everyone's kind of losing a sense of reality. And what I mean is, I could type a comment and I'm not looking at someone when I'm saying something hateful or mean. So I'm not really seeing that negative effect, especially when it comes to reactions of like inappropriate photos or videos, also. So you're not seeing how that's truly affecting somebody mentally and physically. And I think it really contributes to kind of the idea that you're not always fully considering the potential consequences of what you're saying or doing or sharing online. And then the second thing I think is children are learning how to use social media and phones at a super young age. I mean, I know I have cousins who know how to use Snapchat and swipe correctly on the phone by the age of 2. And I really think that's where like the addiction of social media begins, and that needs to be limited at an early age.
Oh yeah. God, that's crazy. Uh so I think to repeat back one important thing that you said, it's this critical stage in brain development aspect of, adolescence, youth using social media. In your experience, and just from where you sit now at the age of 21, you think that's true and really dangerous.
Yes, I really do.
Yeah. Well, my goodness. We just opened up a whole can of worms, didn't we?
Yeah, and the other thing too is some of your first comments that you made, Avery, were that it's not as regulated as some people think they might be. I think people in general understand that social media is only regulated as much as those who are shining the light on it. So the companies aren't going to say, "Oh, hey, that's indecent, or that's dangerous, or that's hate speech, or whatever it is." Somebody typically, and I know they have departments that are in charge of it, but they typically, in my opinion, don't always spend time trying to take care of things unless somebody else points them in that direction. And so I'm glad that we're talking about this, and it's a very important issue, no question. So pointing out the problem is the easy point. What can be done to curb the kind of influence and make it so there are more positive outcomes? This is the hard part of the podcast where I probably sound like the old guy. But I'm skeptical that a surgeon general or other well-meaning adults or organizations that Eileen was talking about earlier in the podcast can get their arms around this issue, when the whole idea behind some of these platforms is to do the exact opposite of what adults want you to do. So all the adults say, "Oh, we got to do a better job, mental health, social media, etc." So Avery, what do you think about that when you realize that, say TikToks, they're doing things that are sort of controversial sometimes. They're doing things that sort of fly in the face of what everyone else says you should be doing. What do you think about that, and how do we resolve that?
Yeah, so I think that's a really, really hard question, just because how do you regulate the content that people are seeing? You really can't. And as many regulations as you put out, hey, you can't say this, you can't post this. I'm constantly seeing on TikTok that they're finding ways around it, whether they're using code words or, so I feel like that's a hard question. I think the biggest thing in addressing like the issues of what children and the youth are posting and seeing, I think people need to set like that level of expectation for their children, and like kind of what's appropriate and inappropriate to say or do online. And I think a big thing too, um, is just explaining, what happens to people when they're being exposed to this negativity. And I think it's really important to monitor, obviously, their on the negativity kind of, what are they seeing? What are they posting? And I think a lot of apps are starting to encourage parental restrictions. I'm not sure how far this goes, or I don't know if TikTok necessarily offers that yet. But yeah, I don't think you should shield children either from social media completely too, because I feel like when I was growing up, I saw a lot of people being told, hey, you can't use this, you can't use TikTok, you can't use Snapchat. They still did it though. They still had accounts. So it wasn't safe because they were sneaking it. So I think it's just teaching how to be safe and responsible online.
Mm-hmm. Can I have a follow-up? Because I'm curious what you think of some of the solutions that have been proposed very recently, and this is on the legislative front, So there are some bills that have been introduced in Congress as well as in state legislation around the country in a couple of places. But at the congressional level, we have senators from Connecticut, Arkansas, Hawaii, Alabama. They've come together to introduce, I think it's two different, and they're bipartisan bills, and they're intended to tighten regulation of social media companies to do what we're talking about, the protection of the mental health of our youth. But the ways that they're suggesting in this legislation that they be monitored are it's a combination from what I understand. So pardon the layman's terms, but essentially it's if a national kind of verification process of age be introduced before anyone is allowed to create an account on any social media platform. That's kind of interesting. If that's possible, that's, like, oh, well, that's different from what I've personally heard before. They're also talking about raising the age to 16 from 13. It's another one. And another aspect of one of the bills is changing or mandating and then monitoring these social media platforms so that their algorithms cannot target people under the age of whether it's 16, 13, whatever it ends up being. So what do you think about those proposed solutions, Avery? What's your reaction when you hear those? Are you skeptical? Are you kind of like, maybe it'll work? Tell us.
I mean, I think in a perfect world, that would be great. I know that the age is usually 13, and I'm curious on how they kind of would regulate or figure out the age, because I know you could kind of just type in like whatever birthday. I think that the algorithm would be great, because a lot of times I even see such inappropriate things on like TikTok and Instagram, and there's like literal children commenting, what does that mean? And people are like explaining it to them. So if they could kind of take content and shield, the younger users from seeing it, I think that would be great. I just always feel like on social, there's people with bad intentions. There's always going to be, you can't kind of weed out the people with bad intentions. That might find a way around that. I mean, I hope they wouldn't, but I do think it's great that they're kind of recognizing that, hey, this whole age thing isn't working out right now. How can we solve it? So I definitely am glad they're trying to find a solution. I am a bit skeptical though of like how that would work out, or if it would be a permanent solution, because I feel like there's always going to be people looking to bypass those.
Right. So the question is it worth trying to legislate or try to put up some of these fences around it, or historically, are people just going to find ways around it if they really want to anyway, and continue to be quote unquote harmed by some of the content they may be experiencing?
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. I just wonder, is there just going to be like a backlash in general of people, youth in particular, saying, sorry, I've seen too many of my friends get messed up by this. I don't want anything to do with it. Like you sometimes see that with people who have, experienced the effects of addiction, and this is an addictive product. What do you think, Avery? Are they going to just say, I don't want to do this anymore? Stuff's bad.
Yeah. I think it's like that's a hard one too, because I think a lot of people don't think of social media as like a bad addiction as they would, like drug use or alcohol use. I feel like it's not on the same, like people don't think of it as on the same level, especially when you're young. You're kind of doing what everyone else is doing. I don't know if people of the age 13 to 16, around under 18, really think like, oh, this is truly affecting people unless you do know someone. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if they take it as serious.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that people are, when you're that age, and gosh, it was a long time ago when I was that age, but I remember, even though it was a century ago, it was you feel like you're invincible. You feel like, well, here are the rules for everybody else, but I'm a teenager. I'm invincible. And so the rest of us can see what's going on. And I just worry that the people who it's affecting most won't see it. That's a huge concern. And I feel badly because we're raising some really good issues, but I don't feel like, a lot of times on Can You Hear Me, we try to offer solutions, and I'm not sure there are any tangible, real solutions here. We're raising some of them, but we can also see, the pitfalls of trying to introduce those as well. So I just hope that people that are listening understand that it is a real issue, that, the Surgeon General and some of the most important agencies around the country are saying, hey, this is a big deal. And people take that seriously. But at the end of the day, it's up to not only the kids, but people, parents who are supposed to be making sure their kids are making good decisions, that should be part of this solution as well, in my opinion.
Yeah. It is a very complicated thing, no doubt about it, because it really does seem to be pushed on to the parents right now. But at the same time, as a society, and even just across the globe, the use of social media, particularly amongst youth, is a way of life. It's inescapable. So, how are parents supposed to, effectively monitor? Which monitoring doesn't even lead to change necessarily, because there can be so many, accounts out there that you don't even know are associated with your own child. So it's a very, very complicated issue, no doubt about it. I'll just mention on the topic of solutions, not that this is a solution at all, but the American Psychological Association did release, I think it was in early May of this year, the first ever guidelines on social media use for teens. And so we'll link that in our show notes, for parents who clearly are concerned about this, that they might find some good advice in there that they haven't seen elsewhere. So we'll link that in our show notes. I have one final question for Avery before we wrap up. It's I don't think it's a long response, but I just wonder, Avery, seeing this Surgeon General's report come out now, and you're already 21. In any way, after you read this, and you probably wouldn't have read it if you weren't going to engage with us in this conversation. I mean, let's be honest. But having read it,
we made her read it.
No. I know. No, it was making headlines. Yeah,
of course.
Anyway, so having you're aware of this now, and you've read it. Were you like, gosh, guy, thanks, or gosh, world, finally, and could you have done this sooner? This might have been nice, could have helped a lot of people. I don't know. What was your reaction when you read it?
Yeah, I definitely was glad that someone was finally like, hey, this is a serious problem, especially for teens. I don't know, I hope it just kind of shows people with all the stats and everything that it includes, like, hey, this is affecting a large group of people. Like, you need to start kind of being more responsible yourself on social media. And I hope, if anything, it kind of makes people think before they post or share something or comment something mean on someone's post.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point.
I know we're wrapping this thing up, but can I jump in on just something that's it's a little off the exact road we're on here, but it's still very important, and I would love to hear what Avery has to say about it. I was just reading something on LinkedIn News, and we can link this to the show notes. Again, Eileen, you always do a terrific job of that. AI's effects on socialization, and the idea behind this article is that humans are seeing less of each other, and with the introduction of AI, researchers are concerned about America's loneliness crisis will only worsen, and they're especially worried about, guess what? Kids who are younger, young adults and kids. Socialization is trending downward. People spend more time alone. They have less close friends, and that's linked to significant health impacts. So, AI, chatbots, sort of, the virtual reality game is definitely catching on, but that's hurting the human interaction. So I guess I have two questions here. One, do you see that happening with people in your generation, Avery? And two, what would you do to change that or to mitigate it?
Yeah, I definitely think, even especially like before AI was big in the news over these past couple months, even after COVID, I saw a lot of downfall in socialization with people, even afterwards, like not really being able to go out or talk to people in the same way, having a hard time because they weren't connecting. And then with AI, it's like you almost like really don't have to leave and go, like I think it's definitely scary how real these things have gotten, like especially with the virtual reality, and like Snapchat now has AI that you could talk to. Like I think there needs to be a point where we draw a line of, okay, we use this as like a tool, and but yeah, I think it's definitely, there's just like social media, there needs to kind of be regulations for it, because it can be helpful, but at the same time, it can be detrimental to people's health and physical and mental. So I think like social media, figuring out how it's helpful and useful. And then, okay, where do we draw the line with this?
Man, you know how to hire them, Eileen. These
Thanks.
these
All her.
interns, these young adults,
Super smart. Yep.
they're amazing. Avery,
She's
you are
so
awesome.
smart.
Thank
I know
you.
you're proud of her, Eileen.
Yes, I am. Oh, well, gosh, I just want to say thank you to you, Avery, for honestly having the courage to join a bunch of old people and tell us what you think. Because especially, somebody who happens to be your employer, but you came on here and you gave us some really keen insight, and we appreciate your perspective and the fact that you were willing to share it with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, that's going to do it for another episode of Can You Hear Me? I'm Rob Johnson.
And I'm Eileen Rochford, and we thank you all for listening. Remember, you can find Can You Hear Me wherever you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more.